Good morning. This is Terry Behrens. I'm the Executive Director of the Johnson Center for Philanthropy. I want to welcome you to the second in our series of webinars on evaluation and impact investing. This series is sponsored by the Johnson Center, the American Evaluation Association, the Council of Michigan Foundations, and Mission Investors Exchange. The Johnson Center is based at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we are the hosts for the webinar today. Our mission as a center is to advance, strengthen, and understand philanthropy. We provide professional development, applied research, consulting, and data tools for both nonprofits and foundations. As impact investing is becoming an increasingly important part of the philanthropic toolkit, we're pleased to be bringing this webinar to you in partnership with our other sponsors. Before I turn it over to John Sherman, who's going to say a few words on behalf of the American Evaluation Association, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go through. The conference, oops, that was me. The conference will be on mute, so we ask you to use the chat box to send us your questions or comments at any time throughout the webinar. You should see the chat box on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be mailed to all registered participants along with a copy of the slides that we'll be using today. And we'd like to find out a little bit more about you, who all is on the webinar today. We ask you to click on the response that best represents what type of organization you're with. All right, let's go ahead and skip to the results. Okay, so we have the majority of the plurality, I guess is the right word, right, of our participants are consultants or with a consulting organization, and another good chunk are with other. And then we have about 20% of nonprofits and about 14% with foundations. Next, we want to find out if you're a member of the American Evaluation Association. Wow, look at that. Even mix. Okay. All right. And next, we want to find out what your field of expertise is. Okay, we have a lot of evaluators with us today. About 2/3 of the group is evaluators, about 7% in investing, 13% in administration, about 13% other. Okay, so that gives us a flavor for who's on the call. And I'd like to turn it over to John to say a few words of welcome on behalf of AEA and introduce our speakers.
Wonderful, Terry. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you may be calling in from. Again, I just wanted to also give a special nod of thanks both to Terry and to all of our partners that have joined us in the webinar. And of course, a special nod of appreciation for everybody who's worked behind the scenes or who are in front of the scenes to bring all these to you. It's all a volunteer effort. It's a love of labor, and we hope that you enjoy it as much as we have in putting it together. So a little bit about me. I'm Senior Managing Director of the PSC Social Impact Advisors, as well as a member of the AEA's Working Group on Social Impact Measures. Our shop focuses on the role of leadership in social finance so that leaders can better anticipate, adapt, and recalibrate their strategies to the really increasingly wicked social problems that they're facing. why I want to lay a little bit out about why we have this series and how we organize the series. Given that many of you are evaluators, you more or less probably have a sense of this, but I'm going to make sure that we're all on the same page with it. First of all, as the title implies, this is a three-part series that we really wanted both evaluators in the social finance field to come away with a better understanding and an appreciation of the roles of evaluators and the role that they can play in social finance. So why do we think this was important? Three reasons, really. First of all, there's the issue of metrics. Second, the issue of complexity, and the third, the issue of getting behind the what to the why of social impact. And the first one around metrics is, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that, of course, ensuring that the social environmental impacts that investors want to aspire to have are appropriately identified, are measured, and are assessed. This is paramount, of course, to the integrity of the social finance field. But I think, as we'll hear a little bit more today from Courtney and her team, the presenters, it's as important to the communities in which these investments are occurring. So this is our field. This is what evaluators do, right? This is in our wheelhouse. This is what we bring not only to in terms of understanding what metrics are, but we have a full quiver of strategies to how to engage and support communities in identifying and assessing impacts that are happening in their communities. So that's one. Secondly is around complexity. As evaluators, we know that a lot of these social environmental issues an investor wants to impact are complex. There's lots of convergent causes for them, and there's lots of downstream impacts. They're part of larger natural and social systems that need to be understood. As evaluators, we're comfortable in working in complexity. We have the methodologies to understand them. We have ways to be able to bound the system so we can get our arms around it, and we can help identify then appropriate measures both at the individual and systems level to capture actually what's happening. And I think the third reason, which I think is probably the most important in a way, is understanding that if you look at this incredible and rich field of efforts to identify what needs to be measured and to establish metrics to measure them, it's phenomenal and it's really impressive. If you look at the GIN and the IRIS Plus system, the Impact Measurements Project, the host of ESG criteria, and all the rating systems that, as you know, have yet to been standardized, the principles for responsible investing, the GLI, FutureFit, on and on and on. These are all parts of an increasingly sophisticated body of literature and tools on both on what and how to measure social impacts. That's an important part of the field. However, what evaluators bring to that's beyond that, not only contributing to those efforts, but also helping understand, so what is the why behind the what of all those measures? When you're looking at outputs and outcomes, how do you explain not just get the numbers, but understand the nuance and the reasons for their happening? Or for what you thought was going to happen is not happening. We know that getting the numbers right, we know understanding why that's happening is critical. And this is, again, in the wheelhouse of evaluation. And again, why we want to make sure that evaluators engage with social impact investors who are bringing their incredible skills, insights, and, of course, money to the table to make a difference. So the way we laid out this series is threefold, trying to put it in a context that evaluators understand and that we all work with. So three series. The first one that we had back in September focused on the early planning and due diligence process of an investment or of an evaluation. The part that we're going to talk about today is the second part of that, and that's actually how do evaluators engage investors in active investments in that implementation stage. And the third webinar, which we'll have in later October 30th, is when we're going to have a series, the webinar will focus on the exit strategy, that recalibration time stage when there's information in, the evaluators have been doing their work alongside with their partners in community and the investors, and now they're saying, okay, so what do we learn and what do we do next? So that's the reason for the series. I'm now going to turn it over to jump into the webinar today with Courtney Bollinson and her team. Courtney?
Thanks so much, John. So it is my great honor to introduce today's guests. But first, I'm Courtney Bolenson. I'll be moderating the Q&A today and facilitating part of this webinar. I am on the American Evaluation Association leadership team of the Social Impact Measurement Working Group. And I'm also an independent evaluation consultant, and I specialize in impact investment systems evaluation and transformative evaluation. And I also spent the last 2.5 years working with Engineers Without Borders Canada as their impact evaluation and learning manager, which is how I sort of fell into this field of impact investing. And I'm very excited to share with you some of the folks that we've been working with at Engineers Without Borders over the past many years. So our first speaker today will be Selena Delamini, and she's the current Program Evaluation Coordinator for Engineers Without Borders Canada. And she previously worked as the Social Impact Measurement Officer at EWB Ventures, which is an impact-first seed stage investor focused on sub-Saharan Africa. And as part of that role, she developed an impact measurement and management strategy for the investment team. So she'll bring a wealth of experience and knowledge about that with us today. Also speaking today is Laura Allen, who is the Gender Inclusion Officer for Engineers Without Borders Canada. She's based in Accra, as is Selena, and as is Sandra today, so we've got international speakers with us. And Laura has many years of experience working in Ghana with a gendered lens in both social enterprises and the NGO sector. And she's passionate about social innovation, gender equality, and poverty alleviation. And finally, Sandra Abrokwa will be speaking as our third speaker. And she works with Viamo, which is a social venture, and she'll be telling us all about that today. And she has 13 years of management experience in marketing, sales, strategy, and consulting for multinationals and tech startups in Ghana and the United States. She is currently the country director in Ghana for Viamo Technologies. This is a social enterprise specializing in behavior change communications and evidence gathering for NGOs. So they are a social venture. They do their own evaluation, and they also facilitate evaluation. So they're an interesting speaker to have today. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass this over to Selena, who will kick off our formal presentations today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for that introduction, Courtney. And we will get started and jump into it. And so before we start, we felt it would be important to give some background on who we are, who EWB Ventures is, and the type of social impact investor EWB Ventures is. So EWB Ventures is a seed stage social impact investor focused on sub-Saharan Africa. So how do we define seed stage? So these are usually very young, high-risk businesses. Some are still proving and or iterating on their business model. Some are so young that they may not even have a customer base yet or even generating revenue. And we typically make financial investments of up to about $100,000 USD into these social businesses. And so our fund is also Impact First, dedicated to supporting innovative social enterprises that are addressing inequality, poverty, and also breaking down barriers to opportunities for women and other marginalized populations in the region. And so this is just a visual of where impact investing falls in the field of impact. Impact First investing falls within the field of impact investing. So on the far right, on the far left is your classic investing, and closer to the far right is impact investing, and more so Impact First within impact investing. So while classic investing is more concerned with competitive returns, Impact First within impact investing is more focused on maximum impact solutions, in addition to financial returns, because they are for-profit businesses after all. It's also worthwhile mentioning that we currently have investments into businesses in Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia. So for us at EWB Ventures, what is the purpose of managing and evaluating our active investments? So how do we use the data derived from evaluation? For one, for learning, we gain valuable information and derive learning for better portfolio management, for accountability purposes. So although we are investors, we also have investors that are invested into our fund. So therefore, the information or the data is also reported to our investments on the social and financial progress that we're making on our investments. For program improvement, so it gives us information to be able to assess whether our investments and non-financial support that we provide are having the impact that we desire, and if not, how do we course correct and or mitigate any negative impact? Finally, contributing to the sector. So impact measurement is still in the very early stages, although progress has been made in the field. So therefore, another purpose of our work is to share non-private learning data and approaches to build a sector. And so for us at EWB Ventures, how do we integrate gender in our evaluation? It's worthwhile mentioning that we don't only incorporate and evaluate impact post-investment, and in particular gender. We're intentional about gender impact across the investment cycle. That is from pre-investment all the way to exit. So we're considering our gender impact. So for instance, at sourcing, where we're looking at potentially investing in a business, we're looking and asking questions such as management composition, does the venture have female co-founders, management, does the venture target female customers, or how does the product service engage women in the supply chain? And we also track these as metrics post-investment, just to see how we're doing. And so after we invest, this would be the post-investment stage. So this is where we're doing our impact management, and impact measurement comes in. So post-investment, during our impact management phase, we're tracking the progress of our investment for gender impact. At the very least, we ask our investee to collect, track, and disaggregate the data that they send to us by gender. So aggregating for us the data numerically gives us an idea about scale and reach, but we do understand that this is more surface level information on impact. Therefore, for in-depth assessments of gender impact, we focus on more outcomes-based impact measurement. So here we are more interested in how our investments have created a change for beneficiaries, and in particular, women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. So within our evaluation plan for impact measurement, we're asking questions such as what outcomes are stakeholders, and in particular women and girls, experiencing as a result of our investments. So we're not only looking at positive outcomes, although we would like for it to be outcomes, but we're considering the negative, the positive, intended and unintended, and with a special focus on women and gender impact. So our plan is worthwhile mentioning that our plan is influenced by current methods, tools, and approaches in the field of impact measurement and management, such as the IMP 5 dimensions of impact. And of course, an in-depth outcomes-based approach to evaluating social impact is more preferred for us. But we have to be honest in saying that there are a number of challenges that not only at the investor level, but also at the investee level, that makes impact measurement challenging. So as I stated, some of our investees are at the very early stages. These are really young businesses, and some are not even generating any revenue yet. Therefore, undertaking a very robust, formal, structured, rigorous evaluation can be very costly for the venture. And another challenge, especially for very young businesses, is competing priorities at that time. So yet again, these businesses are still focused on survival, gaining traction and revenue. And sometimes, unfortunately, evaluation tends to take the backseat or the back burner. And finally, just implementation challenges, whether it be lack of capacity to be able to conduct robust evaluation, difficulties generating or collecting quality data, or even identifying appropriate metrics and tools to use. With that being said, there are a number of opportunities and benefits to having robust evaluation. So information that we get from evaluation is used for risk mitigation, internal improvements or iterations to business models, identifying gaps and areas of support, especially at the investor level, to be able to better support and or connect investees to support and advisory services. And finally, there is the opportunity to test out new ideas, new approaches to social impact investing, for instance, gender lens investing, and its potential for impact on women and girls. And with this point, I will pass that on to Laura, our Gender Inclusion Officer, to take us through gender lens investing.
Awesome. Thanks, Selena. So as has been mentioned before, my name is Laura, and I'm working with EWB Ventures to build out their gender lens investing strategy. So I thought that we would quickly just go over what is gender lens investing. Selena mentioned what impact investing is, and gender lens is basically our lens that we're looking at impact investing from. So as defined by the Global Impact Investing Network, GIN, it is saying that gender lens investing is an investment strategy that looks to either A, seek to intentionally and measurably address gender disparities, and or B, examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions. So basically, gender lens investing, or GLI, acknowledges the reality that gender cuts across all aspects of society, and this includes our economic and financial systems. So why is this important, and why are we using gender as a measure of impact? As probably most of you know, globally, women are unproportionately marginalized, women and girls and other marginalized communities. So yeah, it's important to take this into consideration as we move our capital around. And this can be due to cultural norms, lower literacy and education levels, time and mobility constraints, and a general lack of access. So now I'll get a bit into how EWB is doing this. So I've been working with the team, and we've created a gender lens investing strategy. And we're still testing this out and in the midst of finalizing it, but it basically looks at 3 different sectors. So I'll go over the first and third quickly, and then we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the second. So the first part of our strategy is just our investment process, looking at making sure that we are including a gendered lens at every aspect of our investment series. So that's from pipeline development, making sure we're in places where we can attract female entrepreneurs, for example, screening, due diligence, and deal making. And in mobilizing this, we've created 2 tools. So one is a gender scoring tool, which we use during due diligence. And that's just basically a high-level way to see what our potential companies are doing in terms of gender. And it's not a punitive tool, so it's more or less just a way to measure or to kind of see where they're at and then be able to measure a year or 2 years after investment. And because we invest in such early stage companies, they're often not doing too much around gender because they have a lot of other priorities to stay afloat, but it really comes down to how we can gauge their intention. And the second tool we have made is we call it a gender analysis, and it's more or less just a deeper dive into this gender scoring tool, finding out more information of what the companies are doing, and then being able to put some of those metrics into our term sheets so that we can really be intentional about ensuring the companies will do this moving forward. And the third aspect of our gender strategy is simple. It's just our internal team and culture. So it's kind of just a way to keep accountable to ourselves to make sure that we are intentionally recruiting a diverse team and staying up to date in the different spaces and going to relevant training. And then what we'll kind of deep dive on today is our post-investment support. So our post-investment support looks different with each company. Some, it's a little, just maybe a few conversations or maybe a high-level gender strategy with them. But then, for instance, with these 3 companies, we are doing a much deeper dive. We've gotten some funding from the MasterCard Foundation to be able to really test out some of these theories and see how we can create better impact, both social impact and business returns by thinking about gender. So just to high level say which companies we're working on this project with, Numida, which is a fintech lending app in Uganda, Biamo, which is the data technology services in many countries, which you'll hear about more from Sandra, and then Padasente, which is a factoring company in Uganda. And I will note that we are not actually in Padasente, but they are a like-minded business working in the space, so we decided to work with them on this project. So basically, the way that we're going through this process of doing gender with early-stage companies are the steps outlined here. So step 1, we conduct a gender framework analysis and give a gender score. So those are using the tools that I mentioned to you earlier. The second is to draft a high-level inclusion strategy and garner feedback from the company, something that we're really trying to be intentional about because they are early-stage companies and have a lot of competing priorities. We want to make it realistic and tangible. Step 3 is to conduct a deep dive on the venture. So this is really getting into, really understanding the company and how they operate. So this involves interviews, surveys, could be focus groups, kind of depends on the size and the sector of the company. And then we collaboratively make a gender action plan. So these are very specific action items that we can achieve within a set amount of time. And again, going back to this like realistic and tangible goals, especially with the stage that we are working with. And then we're implementing that action plan and then monitoring that. So all of the companies we're working with right now are at different stages on this kind of process. Biamo, we're just at number 3 right now, so we're doing deep dives and seeing how we can come up with some clear actions. So these are just a few examples of what a gender action plan could look like. These are by no means an exhaustive list, but some examples. We tend to break it down into 2 sections, so looking at the business model and the operations side. So business model intervention could be a gender-specific sales strategy. So for example, I was working with a solar energy company, and we created a business or a selling strategy to women's savings groups in the north of Ghana. Another example of a business side could be gender-specific marketing, so making sure you're reaching more females to buy your product. On the operational side, some examples could be a policy and procedure overhaul for employee protection, implementing a mentorship program to improve female leadership, or implementing a gender-inclusive recruitment strategy. So thinking about if your job descriptions have preferred versus required skills, or if you have a diverse interview panel. So those are just a few examples. By no means is that all. And then thinking about how we're evaluating this kind of gender lens investing pilot that we're working on. And so we're looking at kind of two aspects of evaluation because the project is not a super long-term one. This pilot is a year long. So one is the evaluation of EWB's gender lens investing strategy. So how are we doing actually implementing the strategy? Are we reaching the outcomes that we've wanted to? Is it going to plan, that sort of thing? And then the second will be an evaluation of the venture-specific gender strategies. And because this is not a super long pilot, we won't be able to have a ton of learnings, as I'm sure most of you know. Those things take time. But we'll hopefully be able to see a bit of impact on the ventures themselves and their employees, their overall operations, and perhaps a few early learnings on ventures' clients or their beneficiaries. So with that, I will pass it over to Sandra, who can tell you a bit more about this stuff from the venture side.
Great. Very much. So my name is Sandra, and I'm the country director for VMO. I will just share a little bit about how we evaluate impact and how we include gender in our work. So before we start, let me just tell you a little bit about who we are. We are an organization that's a social enterprise, so we care about impact, and then we also care about having a sustainable business. And we focus on two things, behavior change communications and evidence gathering. And the reason why we exist is because we're trying to solve this challenge that is in the world today, where a lot of people are disconnected from getting the information that they need because of certain barriers like infrastructure, like literacy, like distance. And the way that we are looking at solving this is sort of trying to close the feedback loop. So if you look on the diagram here, on the left-hand side, you'll see a community of people. And I think one of the days when development was done where we would sit in our offices and decide what people need. Now we're actually inviting people to be part of the process of how they help themselves. So we give them a voice, and we collect that information, and we use that to inform how we do interventions and how we give them behavior change information that can help them to be better. So that's really why we exist, to close the feedback loop, to push useful information, and then also collect information that allows us to help people and to really give them the agency that they all possess. We do this with certain products. So on the data evidence gathering side, one of the big tools that we use at VMO is IVR surveys, because it allows people to push information or to give information to us in their own languages. So for example, in Ghana, we are at the moment working with an organization that is looking to reach women fish smokers. And obviously these are coastal women. They don't speak English, but they speak the local languages. And so we pushed out surveys that allow them to tell us about, what are some of the barriers that they face in their work, what are some of the challenges that they face. And specifically what we're interested in is whether they know about their risk for anemia by not consuming some of the fish that they're harvesting and smoking. So those are some of the real use cases for our tools. And then on the data collection side, we also push out mobile surveys and then connect people to speak directly with like a live counselor or somebody who's going to support them and give them the information that they need. So for example, in the case of farmers, they can sometimes have a hotline that they can speak to an extension officer or to an agricultural person who can give them the information that they need. And then on the behavior change side, on the right-hand side, we have a service with MNOs whereby they give us free airtime. And with that airtime, we're able to share useful information with people. So in Ghana, we have information on health, we have information on agriculture, on democracy and governance, to name a few. And then we also have Infoline, which is basically IVR push messaging. So it's basically a push and pull kind of mechanism depending on the needs of the intervention and the needs of the folks that we work with. We tend to work with pretty rural communities, But increasingly, I think development is changing where a lot of partners are also trying to engage young people. And so we've also introduced social media bots. So we have a Facebook bot and a WhatsApp bot as well. And these are some of the ways in which we are meeting the needs of the folks that we're looking to serve. Where do we do our work? We're in 22 countries in Africa and Asia. We've worked in over 160 countries. And wherever there's a cell phone, whether it's a smartphone or a feature phone, we can do our work because all of the behavior change communications and evidence gathering we do is through mobile phones. These are some of the organizations that have worked with us. So Johns Hopkins, UNICEF, World Vision, FHI 360, and a few others, just to give you a sense of who does work with us. So how do we evaluate impact? So I think right from the get-go, impact is really important to us. It's in our values. And at BMO, we call our values do it. And it stands for delight, which is always looking to delight our partners and our end users. Unleash, so looking at new ideas, how can we bring all the tools that we have to bear and really unleash real impact, real measurable impact. And then there's impact, of course, because everything that we do is we're seeking to serve, the end user, whether it's the partner or the partner's partner. And so that's something that we really take seriously. So it's right there in our values. When you join the BMO team, these are values that are, embedded in you and you're taking through, and you actually get measured on how you're living, some of these values. And then we also believe in testing because we try to do a lot of analysis on what works, what doesn't work. In some of our gender work, for example, we test out, whether a male voice, responds better, or if people respond better to a female voice, depending on the circumstance. And then also on the right-hand side, where I took a snapshot of our real metrics for the year, so the things that were our goals for the year. So, this is prevalent in all the other 21 countries, including Ghana. In addition to Ghana, sorry. So impact, so looking at how many people are we reaching, that's again, you see that's the very first metric. So again, it's something that I go to bed every day thinking about and, making sure that the work that we're doing is really giving impact. And then it's also on bookings and then revenue, but impact is really important. And you haven't succeeded if you, for example, hit all your bookings and your revenue and don't hit impact. So we use a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods in assessing impact. So the very first box talks about output. So we look at, we measure impact through, the number of users that have been reached. We look at the key messages listened to. So key messages are, the key bits of information, the vital bits of information that if you hear nothing else when we send you a message in your local language, you should at least remember, these three things. So for example, if it's messaging on malaria, you have to remember to sleep in a treated mosquito net. You have to remember to, take medication as soon as possible. Things like that. Those would be key messages. And then also whether they told their friends and family members about what they are learning, because we find that, you can reach impact by reaching the people that you have, but then also whether they are ambassadors for the information that they've heard. And then there's also the disaggregation that we do on every project by gender and by age, by location, sometimes by occupation. So gender is always something that is at the forefront of every intervention that we do. And then we also look at, in terms of impact, how much money and effort has been spent to achieve results. Because sometimes you can achieve results, but maybe too much money has gone into it, so it's not sustainable if you're trying to scale up. So these are some of the things that we also look at to make sure that we're getting what we need. And then we also do like treatment and control groups. So we might have two communities where we would have like a control group that gets no intervention, and then a treatment group that gets behavior change messaging. We measure the change through an end-line survey and then compare the results to see what behavior change has occurred. And then we also, for UNICEF, for example, we're currently doing a CAP assessment where we look at, a broad group of people, what are their attitudes to, say, gender-based sexual violence, and then we provide some BCT information, and then we measure whether their views and their attitudes have changed from beginning to end. And then specifically for projects that have to deal with like women or a certain gender, we tend to incorporate additional metrics. So we would we'll first do the groundwork of making sure the voice is appropriate, that the language is appropriate, that we have the right time to reach folks. So for example, if you're trying to reach women farmers, they want information really early in the morning or when they're back from the farm, between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. We look at what supplementary content to add on. So should we add nutrition? Should we add education information? We look at, what information should actually be added on. And then we have a BCC expert who weighs in on all of this to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And then we also look at tracking those additional metrics. So how many women and girls are listening to the additional information? What's the frequency? Are they listening every day, every other day? And then we track the most and popular and the least popular just to see what their need is and what they want to hear more of. And then the qualitative side are user stories and testimonials. I'll just share a quick example. We have a project with the Gender Center here in Ghana, and it's called Cell Phones Against Sexual Violence. And we have gender clubs in different schools across Ghana, and they have a cell phone where they can use that to call and speak to a live counselor who's seated here in our Accra office. And they can speak about, the elder in my church is harassing me, what should I do? My national service teacher is, asking me for sex for grades, and, what support can you give me? And this is one of the projects that I'm really proud of, and we've seen a lot of traction with. And one of the things that was interesting is that we thought that it would be mainly girls calling, but we also had about 40% of boys also calling. So this was just supposed to show the impact. And then, just to wrap up, when we're evaluating our interventions, we're mindful of some biases that are, inherent in our approach. So self-reporting, because the information is coming from those on the ground, telling us, what their views are. And then also because we're using mobile phones, people tend to be more candid on phones than if you were in person. And then we also try to isolate what impacts would have happened anyway. So just to make sure that the impact is really due to us and not something else that was happening in the organization or in the community. And then we take data very, very seriously. I can't stress this enough. I think it's really important that people know and consent to being part of the interventions and giving us information. And one of the things that we're discussing internally is there more that can be done here just to make sure that we are protecting people's privacy. So I will end here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Sandra, Selena, and Laura, for telling us about your work. And so this moves us into a Q&A portion of this webinar, and we have quite a bit of time, which is by design. So we highly encourage the audience to consider what was shared today, to consider any questions that you have about this sector, about how evaluation fits into an impact investment, and our group will do our best to answer those questions. So, and you can just, as Terry mentioned at the beginning, you can just write your question in that Q&A chat box at the bottom left corner of your screen. And so while everyone is coming up with your own questions that you'd like our panelists to respond to, I do have a few questions that I'll kick us off with. So my first question is directed at Selena, actually. So Selena, you mentioned during your presentation, you were talking about some of the challenges with using evaluation in impact investing, but more specifically with a seed stage business, that there are some really particular challenges at that seed stage, including competing priorities. And so my question for you is that even as there is this tension, it seems that evaluation is really valuable at this stage because a seed stage business is early enough that they're nimble, they're able to make use of evaluation information to improve their products, to improve their customer service. And so from your experience, how do you think we can better support early stage businesses to do both, to utilize impact measurement, to conduct impact measurement, and to also develop their business?
Thanks for that. Thanks for that thoughtful question, Courtney. I just wanted to say, first and foremost, I believe it's important to help businesses see directly the business value of evaluation. Most times they're seen as having two separate purposes, the financial piece and the social impact piece to it. So being able to see the business value to social impact measurement, and that evaluation data can be actually used to make financial decisions and drive growth. So just thinking back, for instance, evaluation can be used both by investors and investees as a way of better understanding their customer base, so who are their customers, the context they're in, socioeconomic status, preferences, and this information can actually be used to segment customers, develop an effective marketing strategy, and also be used to refine or develop new products. So not only are we able to use that information to assess how we're doing with progressing towards our social goals, social impact goals, but could very well be used in making financial decisions. And finally, supporting the ventures with any barriers that are impeding evaluation. So for instance, if it's a lack of technical expertise, a lack of know-how, evaluation know-how, just supporting with some capacity building to be able to undertake evaluation successfully. And also, if possible and where possible, being able to support with some kind of funding for the investees to be able to carry out this work, because from an evaluation point of view, we do know that it can be costly to carry out a robust structured evaluation. So helping out to mitigate these challenges, I think would be really important.
Thank you so much, Selena, for that response. And following up on what you're talking about and on my question, I want to bring Sandra into the conversation. And Sandra, Viamo is really interesting because even from the earliest stage of your business, you were including a measurement. You were thinking about impact measurement in your work. And I think that as we're talking about, this is typically really challenging for startups, but it seems that Viamo was able to find a way to build a measurement in from the very beginning, even through these challenges. And I wonder if you could speak a bit about that.
Sure. I think the reason is that this organization was started in Ghana, in the north of Ghana, in Tamale, where two EWB fellows, discovered this need. And so I think from the very onset, it was clear that you need to get the kind of impact that you're looking for, you really need to have that, as like your bedrock, because that's what you're going to be basing all your decisions on and all the conversations with the partners on. So I think once they realized the need and the fact that, people had something to say but didn't have the means to say it or the means to get back to the people who were making decisions about their lives, and then also those who were making decisions about their lives, thought they go to the field and they collect information, but you don't really have that real time, loop. And so I think that informed how we embedded, measurements and impacts right from the get-go. I think that's really what was driving us. And as we progressed and spread out to other countries, we found that to be really valuable and something that a lot of partners come to us for. So it's not just, can you send these messages to so-and-so people? But it's really about, can you advise us on how to get the best out of this intervention that we're doing and how to measure it correctly and to really get information from the horse's own mouth, if you will.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandra. So another question is, so this webinar today focused not just on how to bring evaluation in to active investments, but also how to think about this work from a gender lens. And I think that was a really unique part of your presentations, where we started to talk about not just doing evaluation, but where gender comes into play. And this is becoming a really an important and fortunately more and more common topic in the field of impact investing. You have funds that are seeking to be gender lens investment funds, and you have a number. The Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs recently had a grant specifically focused on bringing a gender lens into impact investment. So this is really timely. And I wonder if both Laura and Sandra, if the two of you could talk about why you feel a gender lens is important. I think there's sort of the obvious side of it, but I imagine that the two of you have a more nuanced perspective on why that is really important. Maybe Laura, if you could start, and then Sandra, you could follow.
Oh, sorry. Hi, just unmuting. Yeah, so that's a good question, Courtney. I think as EWB, we are really noticing and prioritizing gender as an important lens because we are so impact focused. And I think it's pretty, as most of you probably know, to think about impact without gender is you're missing a huge spot, right? So that's kind of being a blind spot on the impact side. But then there's also, tons of research out there that's showing how important thinking about gender is for business success. There's big studies done by McKinsey and that sort of thing that look at like Fortune 500 companies that perform better if they have females on their board and things like that. There's less research around that at kind of the seed level stage that we work at. So I think that that's also a really important reason to bring this into our work, is to start building that research or continue building that research. As you mentioned, Courtney, there are funds out there now that are making this a priority, but I think that it's important to continue to build that research because, I personally believe that it is better, the efficiency of having teams that are diverse and like having, sales strategies that are inclusive is just going to improve business overall. So I think that's kind of coming from the EWB lens. That's why it's important that we're really focusing on gender as not only impact, but, financial return as well. I don't know if Sandra has anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just, kind of bring it to life with like two examples. So like here in Ghana, we did some work with a group of women and men, and we were asking, a certain question about ag. I think they were cocoa farmers or something of the sort, one of the crops, the cash crops. And, we were sending messages out to all of them in a male voice, and we were having issues with the female farmers because their husbands were saying, like, who's this man who's calling you at this time? And I think that just lets you know how important it is to have not a one size fits all, but like a gender lens, so that you can appreciate the differences between men and women and make sure that you are you're taking that into consideration when you're serving them. I think it's so important. You can't get the kind of impact that you want without taking that on board.
Great, thank you for that response. So I'm going to start moving into some of the audience posed questions, and again, I'll just say no question is too simple or introductory or complex. So any questions that you might have in the audience, please do go ahead and post them. But one of the questions we had actually starts to build on some of what our three panelists mentioned during the presentation, which was that there are a number of tools in the sector right now that evaluators and non-evaluators alike are making use of to bridge measurement and investment. And some of those tools are the impact management project's 5 dimensions, also the GINS IRIS Plus, especially IRIS Plus is sort of a second version of IRIS, so more than just a list of common metrics and a common language for what a metric might mean, but there's a lot of tools and resources for how to then take that to the next level. So that's a tool. ESG considerations. There are a number of things. Another one is lean data, which came from Acumen and now is a part of decibels, 60 decibels. And so one of the questions that we received was for Sandra, and how would you compare VIAMO with the lean data approach that was developed by Acumen and 60 decibels?
Yeah, I was just saying to Tim that I think it's pretty comparable because if you look at our approach, I mean, like I mentioned, from the very beginning, it was really about putting the end user at the heart of the intervention. So not just sending them what we think they need, but really understanding from them what is their what do they care about and what do they want and what could improve their lives. So I think it's pretty similar in that it has the end user at the heart of it. I think in terms of, whether we have I think Tim's follow-up question, whether we have our own take on it, I wouldn't say we have our own take because, again, it's what we've been doing from, the very, very early stages and what we continue to do. Sometimes when I'm in meetings with, say, the World Bank or, one of these, like, World Bank-ish type of organizations, they always, try to challenge on, the information that you collect is self-reported. And my challenge back to them is, as it should be, because you should believe people who are being affected by the intervention. I'm not saying it should be the only way, but I think it should be a principal way in which you assess impact. So absolutely it is self-reported, and we're proud that it's self-reported because why shouldn't you believe what people are telling you about, what they need and what's good for them and how they think they should be helped?
Thanks, Sandra. And actually a follow-up question to that that I think might be useful for everyone is to talk a bit about the distinction between VIAMO is an interesting case because you are a tool that other startups, other investors, other NGOs couldn't use to conduct evaluation, but you also conduct evaluation of your own impact. And so I think that distinction is important, that you kind of have both of these tools, and maybe you could speak a little bit more about that distinction, how you do evaluation and how you enable evaluation, and I think that might help as well.
Sure. So in terms of how we do evaluation, it's some of the things I spoke about in the presentation. So using, treatment and control groups, using a CAP assessment, using qualitative and quantitative, methods, but also how we do our own assessment. So once every project or every intervention is done, internally we sit together and do a retro call, we call it, and we look at, what worked here, what do we think we could have done better, how could we have, higher interactive, responses, could we have spent less money so that if we want to scale this up with our partner, it can make sustainable sense. So we kind of do it on both sides internally and then also with what the partner wants. But I think for me the most fun is the internal one because it just speaks to our values of testing. Because with every project we pick up a lot of insights about what works in engaging people with behavior change information and evidence gathering, and we pick up a lot of different behaviors and things that we can use for other projects. And so for me, that's where I think the power of the VIAMO, I guess, business is, because you can use it to iterate and get better and better and better as you go along. I think when we started in 2014 to how we do impact evaluations now is vastly different because of all the insights that we've picked up as we've gone along.
Great, thank you, Sandra. And so continuing to go along the theme of tools, Another, maybe not a tool, but a lens through which you might develop an evaluation process is the SDGs. And we've seen a lot of investors are interested in building portfolios around certain SDGs. The IRIS Plus system has a process through which you can select metrics based on SDGs. So this is also a common theme in this sector. And so one question we have is, how are the SDGs playing into your thinking about evaluation? And that's a question for all of you. So maybe we'll start with Selena and Laura, and then Sandra, you can speak to that as well.
Absolutely, and thanks for the question, Courtney. So we do consider the SDGs in our evaluation, but it's by no way or means the only framework that we use for our evaluation. So we have currently linked our impact to the SDGs. We've linked our impact thesis, so more like our mission statement, to the SDGs, and particularly SDG 5 and SDG 1. Those are the two populations that we're most interested in, so women and marginalized populations, and also populations living in poverty. And where possible, we ensure that we do know that SDG washing is a thing. So where possible, we ensure that we're linking the SDGs to their prospective indicators on the SDG list, and then tracking our impact as a result, and monitoring that as well. And so in particular, SDG 5, I believe one of the indicators has to do with women at the managerial level. And so that is particularly important to us. And if you could remember, I spoke a bit to our pre-investment. We're looking at board composition, managerial level, how many women or co-founders, how many women at the board level in key decision-making positions within a business, and that influences greatly with our gender lens approach. And we do track this information post-investment as well, just to see how we're doing in tracking that information, and also in making progress to SDG 5, gender equality.
Yeah, I think that Selena summed up the SDG and EWB pretty well. So I'll pass it off to you, Sandra, if you have anything you want to add.
So I think for us, it's a more indirect approach, although we always have gender at the heart, so definitely speaking to the SDG goals. But I think the way that we work it is through our partners who are focused on that. So, working with the likes of, UNICEF, with FHI 360, these are organizations that are very focused on these goals. And so I think with our work with them, we're indirectly, contributing to that. That would be that's my take on our approach.
Great, thanks everyone. Another question is in reference to the fact that that evaluation is a relatively new concept in the impact investing sector. And in terms of that, there's I think a lot of investors, entrepreneurs are concerned about how to integrate impact measurement and evaluation into their strategic plans. And so that's a question from the audience. So it would be great, Selena, I think that's a great question for you to answer, and Sandra as well. So again, the most efficient and cost-effective way to integrate evaluation, impact measurement into strategic plans, impact theses, business development. Perhaps we can start with Selena.
I would say that just even based on the definition of impact investing, you're not really doing impact investing if you're not measuring the social impact piece of it. So although it is a new concept, it is a really important concept to be considered credible impact investors. And the field has grown so much since its inception. There are so many tools out there that are actually making impact measurement quite cost effective. So there is the IRIS impact measurement system that walks you through. I believe it asks you questions about what your outcome is and guides you through that process. So there's so many tools that are making impact measurement cost effective and actually user friendly. So just to start with the numerous tools that have been developed out there and gathering as much quantitative impact data that you can for a start, and then following through with investigating with the evaluation team when you have specific questions to answer that is beyond just the management or the monitoring piece of your impact. So I would say start by using all the numerous tools that have been developed specifically for impact measurement, so the IMP's 5 dimensions of impact, or even lean data approaches. Those are all in 60 decibels. These are all great tools, cost-effective tools, and ways to actually do impact measurement.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. There are a lot of tools out there. For example, like what we do using mobile surveys, I think it's really helped a lot of organizations to get real-time, insights at a fraction of the cost of sending enumerators out where you have to pay for their transportation and for other things, and it's paper-based. It gets messy, it gets wet, it gets lost. Using a simple mobile survey where people are receiving a phone call just like they would receive a phone call from their, friends or loved ones, can really, bring down the cost of that and give you rich data that you can use to see how you're doing and to see what impact you're making. So I think, definitely take advantage of tools, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You can even look at, some self-service tools, if you want to do it yourself. So I think, it should definitely be a part of your intervention. And the cost shouldn't deter you because there are ways to have it cost efficient and also have it managed by yourself or managed by somebody else for you where you can still keep your costs down.
Great. Those were really, really helpful answers. So another question that was asked by the audience is, I think this is particularly relevant because we know that we have a number of evaluators in the audience today. And the focus of this entire series is trying to bridge between the evaluation profession and the impact investing sector. So the question for all of you is, where in your work do you see evaluators adding the most value? What can they bring to the table that is unique? And where do you see them maybe not adding so much value that you think that is not the place for an evaluator to really step in? And again, I think let's start with Selena and Laura, and then Sandra, you can follow.
I would say as an evaluator, someone coming from the social services background, absolutely the entire process is a place for evaluators. So anywhere from developing evaluation questions, or even before that, developing the program theory of change, the logic model, selecting appropriate indicators and metrics, how to do evaluations. So are we thinking more about implementation? Is it more formative? Is it more summative? Is it more of an impact evaluation? These are all questions and places that evaluators play critical roles within impact investing and impact measurement. And they bring valuable expertise and skills, and sometimes in environments where people don't have that expertise. So they're really important and needed pretty much during the entire process and helping guide people to doing effective impact measurement work. So there isn't one specific place for monitoring to evaluation, to selecting questions. Just bringing in that approach is really valuable, and I speak from experience.
Yeah, I can add a little too from my perspective, which is more kind of like a gender consultant type work with different companies. I think in a lot of the work that I do, having evaluators to help understand the outcomes and understand the learnings of a project like the Gender Lens Investing project we're working on is super helpful. To have those learnings compilated and then be able to share that with other companies. So, some of the challenges that we've run into in terms of trying to get buy-in from early stage startups in sub-Saharan Africa who have tons of competing priorities, like why should they think about gender? If we have an evaluator who is helping us to ensure that we can really show the benefits of some of the work we're doing with our companies right now or work I've done in the past, having those kind of clear answers and learnings from what the evaluators have seen in their monitoring and evaluating process is super helpful to get that buy-in as an investor to their companies, and then also to be able to share with our investors, this is the work we're doing and this is why it's impactful. So I think that's important.
I think for me, evaluators play a really important role. But what I would say is that there are different types, the different ways of doing evaluations, and so maybe what we should just be mindful of is, if you're dealing with a big organization that has tons of funding and can afford to do a really, really robust evaluation, then great. Because then you can control for a lot of things and a lot of biases and so on. But there are also some organizations that are doing good work that don't have the means to do a world class something that all evaluators would be really proud of. So I think we should meet them where they are, depending on what kind of fits their budget and what fits their need at the time, so that they don't get overwhelmed. Because I think sometimes when we have small organizations that approach us, they're always a little bit squeamish about this is really great, but it's going to cost me a lot of money. I don't have a lot of money right now, and then we can sort of meet them where they are. So I think evaluators are really important, but we should be mindful of where the client is or where the partner is, so that we can design something that meets them where they are in terms of their journey or their life cycle.
Excellent points all around. Thank you so much. So one more question before the end of our webinar today. And this is about the types of tools that everyone uses for the implementation, analysis, and reporting of evaluations. So we've already mentioned some of the tools that can be used for designing an evaluation that fits this space. And so now we're asking about tools that you might use in the course of implementing an evaluation, conducting analysis, or data visualization, reporting, that type of thing. So we'd love to hear from maybe Sandra. Do you want to start this time? And then Laura and Selena can come in.
Sure. So I think for us, what we found to work best is using an internal staff versus hire. Well, it really does depend, but for the most part, internal staff tend to be more engaged. First of all, so even outside of just the money and the cost aspect, they tend to be more engaged. They tend to understand more what you're looking to achieve. Chances are they've been with a project before it was even a project, and so they just bring a special kind of oomph to the engagement. But every now and then, I think, hiring outside, folks also brings a new flavor. So, for example, we're doing some work in ag, and we needed an entire curriculum on rice, maize, and a few others. And even though we have an in-house ag expert, we decided to actually go outside for that because we felt that person was bringing something new. They were actually doing work already with the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, so we thought that added a little extra something to it. So I think it just does depend on what you're trying to achieve. But for the most part, I think internal is what we've had the most experience with. But every now and then we do go outside.
All right, thanks so much to Courtney for your moderating that panel, and to our presenters for your contributions to the field and for your participation today. We will have our next webinar, the third and final webinar in this series, on October 30th. And in that webinar, we'll be hearing about using evaluation to improve the impacts of current and future impact investments. You can register online at the johnsonCenter.org or johnsonCenter.org. And as a reminder, we will be sending out a link to the recording and copies of slides to all of today's participants. So once again, thanks for joining us, and we hope to have you join us again on October 30th.